In the previous lesson, we started to look at HTML, hypertext markup language. This is the way that we structure the content that we're going to display on the World Wide Web in a web browser. And we saw 4 important HTML tags and the elements of an HTML page. The first one specifies the version of HTML. Then we have the root element of the entire document. And then one for the header of the document and one for the body of the content in the document. And using those 4 tags, we were able to create a simple little HTML page that looks like this. Now, obviously, we want to get to a point where we're seeing very interactive HTML pages with a lot of graphics and content and images and so on. But in this lesson, let's walk before we run, I suppose, and just get to changing the appearance of some of the content and having more structure to our content. So we'll start with one of the important HTML tags, which is the P tag, standing for paragraph. We can use the P tag or paragraph tag anywhere in the body of the HTML to delineate or separate different paragraphs or ideas or different parts of the content. So here's an HTML page or part of an HTML page. We still have our doc type element at the top. We have the head, the body, but within the body we can have paragraph tags, start and end tag, for our paragraph elements, and we can have many paragraph elements, of course, within the body. Now it's important to remember, and I've mentioned before, that HTML specifies the structure of the content, but not necessarily the way it will be displayed. HTML is plain text, but don't think that what you see in your text editor will necessarily translate exactly the same way when rendered in HTML. And here's an example of that. In this case, I have the words, "This is some text." I have a new line and a blank line here. Then it says, "This is some more text," a new line, and so on. And we might think, because we're used to using document editors that are what you see is what you get, that if we were to look at this in the web browser, it would look exactly like this. But actually in the web browser ignores the white space. It ignores the break. It ignores that blank line, and this would all appear as one line of text. So it's important to remember that HTML is being used for structuring the content, but not necessarily deciding how it will be rendered or displayed. In addition to the P tag, sometimes we want to indicate that the HTML is not just content, but rather some sort of section header. And in that case, we use the H tag with a number from 1 through 6, indicating what level or importance of that heading. So H1 is the most important. That would be, for instance, the title of the entire document. And then there's H2, H3, down to H6, which is a very low level subheader. Now the browser determines how to render H1 and H2 and so on, but we would use this to tell the browser this is a section header and not just content. Here in this example, I'm using H1 tag here to indicate that this is the most important header. And then I would see down here, my browser, which is Google Chrome, would render this in this particularly large, bold font. I can have a smaller subheader using the H3 tag, and Google Chrome will use it in a slightly larger than normal text, but also bold font. Now, I've been saying that HTML is used for structuring the content and not necessarily affecting its display, but sometimes we want to tell the browser, hey, this is important text or important content, and we would like you to render it in a way that's different from regular text. And 2 ways of doing that are using the B tag for bold and the I tag for italics. We could also use the strong tag, which is similar to the B tag. It will render in bold, but it just is to tell the browser that this is important semantically, more important in terms of meaning, and not simply show this in bold. Likewise, there's the EM tag for emphasize, I suppose, which also will tell the browser to render it in italics, but to emphasize this text. Previously, I showed the example where we had line breaks and empty lines in our HTML content, but the browser ignored that and rendered it all as one line. But if we want to tell the browser, please put a new line here, or put even a horizontal line here, we can use the HR and BR tags. The HR tag is to indicate that there's some serious shift in the content. We're separating different parts of the content, and that'll render a horizontal line. The BR tag would be a line break where we want to make sure that there's just some white space between the different parts of the content. So for example, here we see some HTML. Here's how it's rendered. The HR tag, for horizontal rule, I suppose, is this horizontal line. The BR is just this extra blank space and extra line break. Two more tags to talk about that are somewhat related, but are going to be used later in the course when we're affecting the appearance of the content. One is the div tag. The div tag gives us some more structure within the body that says that this part of the content goes together. It's a way of organizing the content, and as we'll see later, it's a way of applying visual elements and styling and formatting to parts of the content. Related to the div tag is the span tag. The span tag says, here's some text, some content that we were going to eventually apply some formatting or styling to. It's usually a smaller part of content than the div tag, which can be a much bigger part of the content. Last, within our HTML, we can also have comments. Comments are things that are not rendered in the browser, but are perhaps notes to ourselves or to other people who are viewing our HTML, or we can temporarily remove parts of the HTML. In this part, we're listing people's names, but this particular name here is commented out. It would not appear when it's rendered in the HTML browser. Now you may note that all of these HTML tags start with the less than symbol and with the greater than symbol. We noted also that when we had a line break or an entire blank line, that the browser ignored it. So how can we address these perhaps special characters? In HTML, we can insert special characters using the ampersand, then the particular name, and semicolon notation. For example, as we see here in the slide, ampersand NBSP for non-breaking space, followed by semicolon, puts in an extra white space. Ordinarily, the browser will take any amount of white space and condense it down to a single white space, single space between, for instance, words. But if we want more space or more space between paragraphs, we can use the NBSP tag. If we want to have a less than or greater than, we can use ampersand LT semicolon for less than character, ampersand GT semicolon for greater than character. Now, you might say, well, wait, we started this by saying that less than was a special thing, and so now we have a way of showing less than. But what about ampersand? Because now ampersand is something that's being used in a special way. So if we want to use ampersand, it's ampersand then AMP semicolon for the and sign. And there are lots of other HTML entities, special characters, copyright, registration, the euro character, the pound sterling character. We can insert any of these using the different HTML special entities. Last, here's a big HTML page with all of the things we've seen in this particular lesson. We start with the doc type element, which says what version of HTML we're using. We have the HTML element, which is the root of our structure. Within the HTML element, there's the head, which includes the title and, in this case, some meta information. The HTML element, in addition to containing the head element, contains the body element. The body element, in this case, has some headers, H1 and H3 headers. We see the paragraph tag, or the P tag, used to indicate here's some content that's separate from the rest of the content. Here's a horizontal rule that will give us this horizontal line in the content. We have the div tag, which is going to say, here's some chunk of content to which we may apply styling and formatting later. Then we have the span tag, which is similar to the div tag, but is used for a smaller piece of content. When I look at this in Google Chrome, this is what I see. So far in the course, the past couple of lessons, we've seen HTML. HTML is a plain text, human readable language for indicating the structure of the content that we're seeing on the World Wide Web. And we've started to look at the different tags that we can use to organize that content. Coming up, we'll see more tags, but also start to look at how can we affect the appearance of the content in our web browsers.